Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Virtual Thursday's Dire Literary Series. And tonight, my guest, who I saw at Mass Poetry over in May, is Matthew Olzmann, and he completely blew me away. And just a wonderful, wonderful poet and writer. And I'm really, really happy to present him to people that might not have heard him before. And let me tell you a little bit, or show you a little bit of something about him. And wow. Well, I thought I had it all prepared. Oh, I know why. It automatically jumps to the stream, so I didn't see it. There it is. So here's his bio. He's born in Detroit and lived for 15 years in Hamtramck, Michigan. Earned his BA from the University of Michigan-Dearborn, MFA from Warren Wilson College, a former Kundiman Fellow. His first poetry collection, Mezzanines, won the Kundiman Poetry Prize and was published by Alice James Books. Olzmann has received praise for his exuberantly thoughtful style and wide-ranging subject matters. His honors include fellowships from Kresge Arts Foundation, Bread Loaf Writers Conference, and the Kenyon Review Writers Workshop. So that is the bio. If you want to find out more about him, he does have a website, then you can go there on your own. It's that's his Alice James Books, but there's his website, everybody, and it's MatthewOlzmann.com. And I need to let some people in. All right. So without anything else out of me, let's turn it on over to Matthew. Welcome, Matthew.
Thank you for having me. This poem is called Not Every Daredevil Dies. Not every daredevil dies while attempting a handstand on the airplane's wings. They don't always fall when scaling a skyscraper with bare hands and no harnesses. Perambulating on a tightrope over a canyon, several never plunge to a gruesome death. And then there's me. I stay indoors whenever possible, take Advil for headaches and Zantac for heartburn. I've got a bottle of Purell in my computer bag, and if I ever forget to bring Band-Aids, I'm instantly filled with remorse. Still, there's a good number of stuntmen and women who do not perish on a motorbike above a row of buses or handcuffed and flung into the Hudson. Despite proleptic voices predicting an abrupt finale, you can place your head in the lion's jaws, tumble over Niagara in a barrel, or backstroke above a frenzy of sharks. Many people have survived. It's not crashes, explosions, or falls from Olympus that end the most courageous of us. Hugo Zucchini, the original human cannonball, died of a stroke. It was diabetes that brought down Evel Knievel. It seems unfair to cheat death in such extravagant ways, only to be asked to make another appointment, to walk through the fire and still need to take your allergy medication. Somewhere, Achilles is felled by a poison arrow. Clark Kent opens another box of kryptonite, and there's always one more unsinkable ship ready to slip beneath the waves. What future does that leave for people like us, people like you and me, we who get colds and paper cuts and always wear our seatbelts? It's a miracle we made it this far. And surprise, I brought you a bouquet of daisies. They lived short, joyous lives. They were delighting by the changing of a season, and then a hand reached down from nowhere and removed them from the garden. My invisible horse and the speed of human decency. People always tell me don't put the cart before the horse, which is curious because I don't have a horse. Is this some new advancement in public shaming, repeatedly drawing one's attention to that which one is currently not and never has been in possession of? If ever I happen to obtain a Clydesdale, then I'll align absolutely it to its proper position in relation to the cart. But I can't do that because all I have is the cart, one solitary cart, a little grief wagon that goes precisely nowhere, apparently one invisible, apparently, along with apparently one invisible horse, which does not pull, does not haul, does not in any fashion budge, impel, or tow my disaster buggy up the hill or down the road? I'm not asking for much. A more tender world with less hatred strutting through the streets. Perhaps a downtick in state-sanctioned violence against civilians, wind through the trees, water under the bridge, kindness. LOL, says the world. These things take time, says the office of disappointment. Change cannot be rushed, says the round table of my smartest friends. And together they say the cart, they say the horse, they say, haven't we told you this already? And so my invisible horse remains standing where it previously stood, between hot dog stands and hallelujahs, between the NASDAQ and the moon's adumbral visage, between the status quo and the great filter. And I can see it's not his fault, being invisible and not existing, how he's the product of both my imagination and the greater good's failure of imagination. Watch how I press my hand against his translucent flank, how I hold 2 sugar cubes to his hypothetical mouth, how I say I want to believe in him, speaking softly into his missing ear. Earthlings. The earthlings arrived unannounced, entered without knocking, removed their shoes and began clipping their toenails. They let the clippings fall wherever. They sighed loudly as if inconvenienced. We were patient. We knew our guests were in an unfamiliar environment. They needed time to adjust. For dinner, we prepared the earthlings a turkey meatloaf with a side of cauliflower. This is too dry, they said. This is not like what our mothers made for us. We wanted to offer them a tour of our world, demonstrate how we freed ourselves from the prisons of linear time. But the earthlings were already splunking our closets, prying tools from their containers, holding them to the light. What's this? They demanded. What's this? What's this? And what's this? That's a quantum annihilator. Put that down. That's a particle grinder. Put that down. We could show you how to heal the sick. We said, we could help you feed every nation, commune with the all-seeing sentient energy that palpitates through all known forms of matter. Nah, they said, teach us to vaporize a continent, teach us to turn a mountain into revenue. Then the earthlings left a faucet running and flooded our basement. All right. First foray into apophatic theology. And then God is not like the sound the kindling makes as it meets the match head, not like the buoy in the bay invisible at night, not like the gravity calling to the pair on the bow above the field, nor the beam from which the boy you knew roped a knot around his neck to yoke this life to the next, if there is a next, and if not, then to nothingness. God is not like nothingness. If God transcends all, then God transcends language. If God transcends language, we cannot deploy language to particularize God. If we cannot articulate what God is, we can only announce what God is not. This is how I approach the divine. I study the corona that circles the eclipse, which I've been told not to look at. Still, there's some elegance in the bright blur of pain behind my eyes, and so, unable to see the center, I trace the mystery's edges. I outline the mystery's border, like making chalk silhouettes of a body at a murder investigation, a technique no detective actually uses as it contaminates the evidence. God is not the evidence, not the residue, the shell casings, the blood pattern, or the partial fingerprint, not the container or the object emptied. I'm not saying God is the negation. I'm saying the crime scene has been compromised. I'm the one who compromised it. And I think I have about enough time for one more, so I'll leave you with this one. It's a poem I wrote for a wedding. It's epithalamium that refuses to ignore the possibility of a zombie apocalypse. Let's be honest. What each of us wants is to never get eaten by zombies, and the shotgun-shaped truth of the matter is we're less likely to be ravaged by the ravenous appetites of the dead if someone just loves us. We each need a partner posted on the roof, someone with a crossbow watching the high cornfields for signs of movement. There needs to be someone willing to brave the basement during the power outage, someone to descend the midnight staircase to repair the generator. We need a reserve supply of bandages, fragmentation grenades, and flamethrowers just in case the whole grid goes down. I'm afraid of dying alone. and I imagine I'm not alone in that fear. Those of us who've known sorrow know the world is populated by those who will respond to our outstretched arms by eating our outstretched arms. The God honest miracle we celebrate today is these gentle and soon to be betrothed friends of ours have found in each other a companion willing to declare in public, I promise to never eat your extremities, kidneys, or brains, and furthermore, I vow to protect you from those who would. We call this commitment marriage, and there is no greater honor than to say, even when the humanity withers around us, I will guard the humanity that stirs, restless and delicate, like a fawn in a field of trillium in you, if the lights of the city go dark, if the highway falls silent, if every radio fills with static, if you are surrounded by a flesh-eating foulness and running low on ammo, I will love you like an unmarked helicopter flying in from the horizon. I will hover over you, and with my machine gunners struggling to hold the danger back, I will lower the rope ladder to meet you. Thank you
Wow.
for listening.
Incredible, incredible reading. So let's get down to some brass tacks here. The subject matters of your poems. I mean, I've read your last book. They're like randomly hilarious in a lot of ways. You know, you have a letter to the cockroach for, say, William Shatner. It sounds like you write, you have this flash of inspiration. Like, is that part of your process?
Um, yeah, I think the process varies from poem to poem, but often I don't always sit down saying this is going to be a love poem or this is going to be um a poem about capitalism or whatever. I like the letter to a cockroach was I just heard that came, that poem sort of starts where the with the initial thing that was interesting to me, the that I learned that uh every like 100 grams of chocolate in the United States can have like a certain number of insect parts in it. I can't remember what it was. Um, I might have put it in that poem, but um, and that was kind of repellent. But then I was thinking about like just like how like that is a type of metaphor where like there's something sweet hiding something that might be a little bit less desirable. So, and usually that's when like the if I don't make the connection between like that initiating idea and something else, sometimes the poem stalls out. So that's a little bit about how the process works. I start writing about something that interests me. It could be an image. It could be just a strange piece of language, two words that sound interesting next to each other, an idea, a random fact like that. And then if I find a way to connect that to something else, sometimes the poem turns into something bigger and becomes a little bit more interesting to me.
That's funny. You mentioned that because you might have already answered this question. And John Raleigh said the imagination is brilliant. So I wanted to talk to you about your imagination. Your poems always capture me because of the turns in them. And I think you successfully do these turns that like work no matter what you do. And it's amazing. I think that's one of your really good strengths. Do you just like if the poem takes off in a different direction, do you let it go and would you advise people to try that method, or do you like, is it more cognitive?
Yeah, sometimes when you're writing about something, you can sense, oh, there might be a parallel situation and you can turn toward it at any time. But a lot of times when I'm drafting a new poem, there might be something that doesn't fit. And I've learned to kind of explore that. So sometimes, a lot of the times, those turns happen more in revision. I'll find like something interesting or something unexpected, and then I'll say, "Well, oh, why is that there?" Where an earlier version of me might have self-consciously revised that out of the poem or said, if you're writing a poem about the ocean, or you're writing a poem about like a cell phone tower, and then suddenly your dad shows up in line 7. You're like, this poem's about a cell phone tower. Why is my dad there? But then maybe there's like some sort of connection there about you're not speaking to your dad or something like that. And then you start to, and if you explore it, maybe it's fruitful. But I mean, it does tend to lead me down a number of weird dead ends that go nowhere, I take the poem off a cliff sometimes, but that's part of the fun of writing, is seeing what's going to happen, then going back and trying something else.
Have you ever chopped out any of those dead ends and made whole new poems out of them?
Yeah, probably. I can't think of one off the top of my head, but I know I've sometimes the dead end is more interesting than the rest of the poem, and then that's just you just start there.
Elizabeth Horwitz wants to know, could you please talk about how much the idea of God figures into your poetry?
Um, kind of a good amount. I think I was raised in a very Catholic household. Like when I say very Catholic, like one of my ancestors was beatified to be a Catholic saint. And I feel like that, although that doesn't, I was told by my grandmother that saintliness is not hereditary, and she listed all these saints that were murdered by their own family. So she's like, so this person might have been a saint, but you are still a heretic and need to go to church. But I think it figures in more as um, background and as metaphor. There's a comedian who is quoting someone else that I recently heard before, like God is the name of the blanket we put over the mystery to give it a shape. And I feel like that happens a lot in art, where it's uh there it's sometimes useful for as a metaphor for things I'm trying to work through in the poems.
So your last book, Constellation Route, which I do want to mention, so I know that people are interested in it. One of the reviews says you address how divided mankind was or is currently. Are we less divided, and can poetry unite us, or is only point out the division?
That's a great question. I don't know. I think I mean, it makes me feel closer to individual people. I don't know to what extent it unites people. I think a lot of the people that read poetry might be on more on one side of the divide that you're speaking of. So, but I mean, I definitely feel it creates connections among people. I mean, it's kind of amazing that I mean, we read poems by people that have been dead for hundreds of years and feel a connection across time. So if it can do that, then I mean, it can probably connect us, to our next door neighbor as well.
I mean, when you're reading, when I've heard you read before, I hear a lot of poets I love within your work. And do you hear other poets when you're constructing a poem um, in your head, their cadence perhaps?
Yeah. I think I hear other poets and sometimes and other poets and but also prose writers, and then also just uh friends. Sometimes I feel like I'm having conversations with other people through the poems. Um, but I mean, I think a lot of all maybe probably all poets are, wearing their influences on their sleeves to various degrees. So, and I think it's like the I mean, one of the reasons I started writing poetry was because I liked reading poetry. It was a little bit of a haphazard and awkward entrance. I didn't know I liked poetry for most of my life up through my teenage years. I always liked stories, but then late in high school, I encountered a poem that I might not have even known the word metaphor, but I started seeing poems as like these really compressed things that could explain very big, complicated things around me, and that became really intriguing to me. So I started reading more poems, and I was definitely like a reader of poetry before a writer of poetry. So I feel
So
like those two things are.
who was the first poet that you read that you said, I need to read more of this?
Um, I don't know if he was the first poet that I read that made me say I need to read more of this, but the poem I was talking about in that moment was it was in my uh junior year of high school in an American lit class, and the poem was actually by a writer, Stephen Dobbins, who actually later became, when I was in grad school, was a teacher of mine. So an odd bit of synchronicity in the universe there.
Was that kind of thrilling to have that connection?
Yeah.
So also you mentioned like you might be able to hear or read prose that stimulates your poetry. Is there a prose writer that sort of expedites creativity for you?
Um, I don't know if reading prose expedites create if there's one particular writer, but I do feel like I read prose when I'm hungry for something to read stuff where things happen. Um, like in poetry, sometimes I can be sort of just swept away on the wave of the language itself. Whereas when I turn to prose, I'm excited that, oh, there's an actual story here. It's not just like someone looking out a window at and feeling sad. It's and so and prose kind of reminds me of that, thinking about the sort of context or the narrative that surrounds even most lyrical poems have some sort of implied narrative that or back which if a narrative makes you uncomfortable, you might think of it as like a background context upon which this like moment in time is sort of suspended against.
Yeah. Also, your writing makes it look so easy, and I know that it's not. So you have your range of subject matters that we've talked about before. Do you realize how difficult it is for other people and other poets to kind of come up with these masterpieces out of some of the things that you write about? Does it just come really naturally for you?
Wait, how difficult it is for other poets to do what?
Yeah, because to come up with these masterpieces out of sometimes pop or trivial types of subject matters and the range of that you go through. For example, like when I heard you read in May, I just wanted to quit.
You know, um, well, thank you. That's really flattering. I have no idea. But um, I mean, I'm aware that for me, it feels difficult sometimes to make poems and to make them work. But I do have that feeling when I'm reading writers that I like that there's something about the poem that feels somewhat effortless. Even having, if you study poetry and you can look at it and say, I'll look at and you can see some of the work. It's still kind of like when you're experiencing it for the first time, it often looks effortless, and that's part of the magic of it. That's probably why we admire some of the writers we admire. But I think about a poem like Bridget Pegan Kelly's Iskandaria about that scorpion, and every time I read it, I'm just kind of like, how did she do that? And but then other poems by um Robert Hayden, uh, his poem American Journal is always sort of fascinating to me, or Lucille Clifton, who has such like a range of voices that she uses from where, the, some of my epistolary poems, I remember early on reading her little notes to Superman. I was like, you can do that. And being sort of floored by that. So, or Wisława Szymborska, how she's able to sort of like, I mean, there's sometimes where I think she's speaking indirectly about things that I didn't even notice the first time, and then, but the poems work on for me on multiple levels. Like her poem, "True Love" seems like it's sort of a playful poem, like about true love and kind of being sarcastically talking about it, but it's also thinking about it's also a critique of collectivist thought, and she's sort of coming at that very indirectly and in a way that sort of defamiliarizes the subject matter, which is kind of fascinating. And I don't and it's so effortless. I probably don't even didn't even notice it the first time I was reading it until I really learn more about like the context of that poem of her poems as a whole. But so yeah, I definitely feel like when we're moved by art, there's a there's something about it that sometimes it's makes it look easier than it is.
Now, for myself, and I know a lot of people that are here on this call, and poetry just excites us. Now, as a professor, when you're presenting poetry to students, um, is there a right way to present it? And what are some of the mistakes in presenting poetry to someone who might be on the fence with whether they're going to be into it or not?
Um, I think it depends on the class and the level of the students that you're working with. I mean, there's some classes I teach that are more advanced, and all the students there are already sort of interested in it. Um, and with those types of classes, you have maybe a different conversation than an intro level class where there might be some sales pitch involved, or but I think I mean, for me, I think the thing is people who take a poetry class often, I mean, they're curious about the art. It's like they don't end up in that class by accident, even if it's an intro to poetry at a college where, and some of the students might never write poetry again. They signed up for the class because there's something about it that they find intriguing. And so, your job is to kind of put some stuff in front of them and talk about how it works, and try to, what if there's a little bit of a spark there, try to nurture that, and give them room to explore their own curiosities through that art.
And now being as general as possible here. So when you're teaching these great young minds, what frustrates, what's the most rewarding, what frustrates you the most?
The most rewarding thing, I mean, depending on like what type of student we're talking about. I think when you're working with at with students who haven't written much poetry, and it's more of an introductory level, it's really rewarding to see them get better and relatively quickly. I think when you've been working at an art for a long time, I mean, when's the last time you got better at something in one day? Like for me, that doesn't happen very often, but you at but in an intro level class, they can have like 4 epiphanies in a week. So where it's like, metaphors exist. Why didn't someone tell me this before? And suddenly they have metaphors in their poems, and you can kind of tangibly see that growth, and that's kind of really exciting. And then with more advanced students, it's exciting to see like the work that they put in start when it like after the class is over, when you see their like one of their poems out in the world, or they get a book published or something. Like um that's kind of the coolest feeling, I think, when you kind of see them, really doing the thing that they wanted to do at a high level. The most frustrating, I don't know. There's I find I guess I probably find it frustrating if I bring in a poem that I think is like where I'm like, there's nothing you can do with this poem other than praise it, and they're kind of indifferent to it. That's happened a couple times, so I have to be careful about what I bring in, you know, so I don't unconsciously judge someone for not liking it, like my absolute favorite thing. But
Well, Matthew Olzmann, thank you so much for being such a gracious guest and reading such wonderful poetry. Folks, this is the book, Constellation Route, and I highly recommend this book. And look how easy it is to add it to cart. Can anyone see that? It's right there. It's so easy. And also read the praise, and here's some of Matthew's other books. So definitely check it out if you enjoyed what you heard tonight, or some of the questions that were answered. Definitely check it out. Again, highly recommended. Matthew, thank you so much for coming in
thank
here
you.
with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me here.
And now I'm going to end the live stream for folks that are watching on the excuse me, on the live stream. Thank you very much. And use the link to come in if you'd like to be part of the open mic. I will gladly welcome you in. Otherwise, I will see you in 2 weeks when we have Kimberly Kearns and her wonderful memoir. So thanks again.